Picture the classic American open road. You probably know the exact image I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, like a lone driver, miles of empty asphalt just stretching out into the desert.
Right, exactly. The absolute freedom of being behind the wheel
Yeah.
of this massive 80,000-pound machine.
Hmm.
It's like the very specific kind of modern cowboy mythology.
It really is. But the reality of trucking in 2026, it shatters that illusion completely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That driver on the empty highway is actually sitting right at the center of this incredibly intense, almost invisible web of like data and surveillance.
Wow.
Yeah, compliance tracking, every lane change, every way station inspection, every historical misstep. It is all being tracked, aggregated, and then fed into these predictive algorithms. I mean, the modern cab is basically a high-speed data node.
Which is wild to think about. And that invisible web is our mission for today's deep dive.
Mhm.
We're pulling apart a massive stack of the latest logistics and background screening compliance guides.
Right, the real dense stuff.
Exactly. We want to decode this safety net that motor carriers use to decide who is actually allowed to share the highway with you. Because whether you are, a supply chain executive prepping for a quarterly meeting, or you're just driving your family down the interstate at 70 miles an hour, you are surrounded by this system.
You really are. It's everywhere.
And understanding it is, well, it's a masterclass in risk management and predictive intelligence. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with what you called the foundational document of a driver's career.
Right, so that would be the driver qualification file. The industry calls it the DQ file.
Got it.
Federal regulations actually require every commercial carrier to maintain one of these for every single driver. It holds, their road tests, their medical certificates. But the real core of the entire file is the motor vehicle record, the MVR.
Now, I always assumed an MVR was just like a quick check to see if someone's driver's license was still valid.
Oh, no, not even close.
Yeah, reading through these compliance sources, I realized the commercial version is far more invasive. I mean, it pulls commercial endorsements, historical suspensions, revocations, and accident data straight from the issuing state.
Exactly. And the federal rule governing all this, that's 49 CFR section 391.25. It mandates an MVR pull within 30 days of hiring a driver.
Okay, 30 days.
Right. But then it requires an annual review. So a carrier has to pull the record once every 12 months, review it, and then document that the driver still meets their safety standards.
Which, I mean, I have to challenge the basic logic of that annual requirement.
Yeah.
Checking a commercial driver's safety record just once a year seems kind of reckless.
Yeah, it introduces what the industry calls the snapshot problem. It's one of the most glaring vulnerabilities in legacy fleet management.
Because, wait, if a fleet pulls a driver's MVR on January 1st,
Right.
and it comes back completely clean, but then that same driver gets a DUI in their personal vehicle on, like, January 2nd, does the carrier just sit in the dark for 11 months?
Yeah. Under the strict legacy interpretation of that rule, yeah, they absolutely do.
That is terrifying.
Because an MVR is literally just a snapshot of a single second in time. A driver could lose their commercial privileges the very next day, and the carrier's administrative systems, they wouldn't automatically catch it until the next scheduled annual review.
Think about the massive liability there. I mean, if that driver gets behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler in October, causes a massive pileup, and the plaintiff's attorney discovers the driver's license was actually suspended back in February.
Oh, that carrier is looking at a catastrophic negligent retention lawsuit.
Right. It would be a nightmare.
And that financial and legal threat is exactly what pushed the industry toward continuous MVR monitoring.
Okay, continuous monitoring.
Yeah, we are moving from a reactive pull system where like an HR manager physically requests data once a year to a proactive push system.
So tell me how this push mechanism actually works in practice.
Sure. So instead of querying the state database annually, the carrier's continuous monitoring software maintains an open API connection or, a regular sync with the state's driver repository.
Ah, okay.
So if a suspension or a new moving violation or even a medical certificate expiration hits a driver's record on a Tuesday, the software detects the change and pushes an alert to the fleet manager's dashboard on Wednesday.
That's fast.
Very fast. And regulatory guidance now explicitly recognizes that this continuous loop, it totally satisfies the federal annual requirement.
Well, problem solved then. We digitize the net, the software catches the blind spots, and nobody slips through the cracks.
You would think so. But what's fascinating here is that this high-tech, real-time federal monitoring system essentially hits a brick wall when it encounters the actual paperwork speeds of individual state DMVs.
Right, because the sources single out California, Arizona, New Jersey, and Illinois as major problem states for this technology, which is crazy to me. California is like the tech capital of the world.
No.
Why is their system acting as a bottleneck for a national safety net?
It really comes down to the underlying architecture of how data actually moves from a local courtroom to a state database.
Okay.
Continuous monitoring relies on the assumption that when a driver is convicted of a violation, that data is instantly digitized and available.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But in states like California or Illinois, the reporting pipelines are highly fragmented. So a conviction happens in a county court. That local court has to process the paperwork, format it, and send it up to the state DMV.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. If a rural county court is backlogged, or if their legacy IT system doesn't perfectly sync with the state's central repository, there's a massive data lag.
So the third-party monitoring software is constantly pinging the state database, but the state database itself is out of date.
Exactly. The digital net is completely blind to what's stuck in county-level purgatory.
Wow.
Which brings us back to legal defensibility. Industry legal experts explicitly warn carriers that they cannot rely solely on continuous monitoring for drivers licensed in those specific states.
Because of the lag.
Right, because if you end up in front of a jury, the plaintiff's attorney isn't going to care about your continuous monitoring software. They are going to demand the official state-issued MVR.
So fleets operating in those states have to do both.
Yeah, they are advised to still perform a manual, full MVR pull every single year just to ensure their DQ files hold up in court.
That reveals a massive structural flaw. I mean, if states have these physical data lags, and if county courthouses can delay the reporting of a severe violation, what happens when a driver simply moves?
The old state hopping trick.
Right. If I'm a driver with a terrible record brewing in local courts in Illinois, could I just, cross the border to Indiana, hand over a clean-looking physical license, and get a new one before the data catches up to me?
You could try, but you are describing the exact loophole that forced the creation of the federal safety net.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, fleet managers don't just rely on state MVRs anymore. They cross-reference them against 3 major federal databases, and the first one is CDLIS.
The Commercial Driver's License Information System.
Exactly. It was built specifically to kill that state hopping trick.
So how does it actually detect an alias or a hidden record?
Think of it as a master federal index. Before a state can issue a new commercial driver's license, they absolutely must query CDLIS.
Okay.
The system uses specific identifiers to check if that individual already holds an active commercial license in another state or, if they have their commercial privileges suspended in a jurisdiction they conveniently forgot to mention.
So it forces the driver's full history to follow them across state lines.
100%.
Okay, so CDLIS stops the state hopping. But then we have the PSP, the Pre-Employment Screening Program. The compliance guides frame this as, like, the holy grail of risk management.
It really is.
Because a standard state MVR usually only looks back about 3 years, right? But the PSP taps into a federal database called MCMIS, showing 5 years of crash history and 3 years of roadside inspection history.
And the inclusion of that roadside inspection history is what makes the PSP so revolutionary.
How so?
Well, consider how a state MVR works. It only shows actual convictions. A driver has to be issued a citation, go to court, and actually be found guilty for it to appear.
Right.
But the reality of commercial trucking happens at the weigh stations and during DOT roadside checks.
Let's walk through that mechanism. So an inspector pulls a truck over for a random level 1 inspection. What happens?
They do a full walk around. They check the brake lines, tire tread depth, cargo securement, and the driver's electronic logging device just to ensure they aren't driving over their allowed hours.
Okay.
Now, let's say the inspector finds a chafed brake hose and a logbook discrepancy. They don't necessarily write a traffic ticket. They often write these up as warnings or out-of-service violations.
And because there's no ticket and no court date, the state DMV never hears about it.
Okay.
That driver's MVR remains completely spotless.
Exactly. But those warnings are immediately uploaded to the federal PSP report.
Wow.
Yeah, and carriers use this as their primary predictive safety tool. You might have a candidate hand you a pristine Florida MVR, right? But their PSP report shows they've been flagged 8 times in 2 years for unsafe driving behaviors or fatigued driving.
That is a huge blind spot if you aren't checking it.
Totally. The FMCSA data proves the value of this. Fleets that actively use the PSP see an 8% lower crash rate and a 17% lower driver out of service rate.
I mean, 8% fewer crashes across a major fleet means fewer 80,000-pound vehicles colliding with passenger cars. That is a tangible impact on you, the listener, driving down the highway.
Absolutely.
Now that brings us to the most controversial federal pillar, the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. Carriers are required to query this system before putting any new driver behind the wheel, right?
Yep, and the fee for that is exactly $1.25.
The financial cost is trivial, but the compliance cost of skipping it is immense. The clearinghouse tracks failed DOT drug tests, alcohol violations, and what they call refusals to test.
Right. And a refusal to test is effectively a career-ending mark. It grounds a driver's commercial privileges instantly.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because the 2026 compliance updates highlight a massive wave of drama surrounding this database. Over the past year, trucking communities on platforms like Reddit have just exploded with anxiety over the clearinghouse.
Yeah, it's been a huge talking point.
And I want to be really clear here, we are not taking sides. We are just impartially reporting on the documented fallout we see in the source material. But the drivers are terrified of fraudulent entries and abuse.
The panic really stems from the mechanics of what actually constitutes a refusal to test.
It's not just saying no.
No, it isn't just a driver explicitly saying, I won't take the drug test. A refusal can be triggered by arriving late to a clinic, walking out of a waiting room because of miscommunication, or even just failing to provide a sufficient sample within a specific time window.
And once a clinic or a carrier reports that refusal to the clearinghouse, the driver is basically dead in the water.
Totally grounded. They can't drive until they complete a lengthy, expensive return-to-duty process.
And the sources show that drivers are alleging former employers are using false refusal reports as retaliation. Like if a driver quits abruptly, an angry dispatcher might maliciously report a refusal to test, effectively blacklisting them from the entire industry.
And that anxiety reached such a fever pitch regarding disputed records and unauthorized queries that the FMCSA actually had to intervene in 2026.
What do they do?
They implemented strict new identity verification protocols for anyone accessing the clearinghouse. I think it illustrates the incredible power these centralized databases wield.
Yeah.
When a single data point can instantly vaporize a person's livelihood, the integrity of that data is no longer just some administrative concern. It's a critical security issue.
Right. So the U.S. has this incredibly dense centralized safety net. Between CDLIS, the PSP, and the clearinghouse, there's almost nowhere to hide. But supply chains are international. Trucks cross the Ambassador Bridge from Detroit into Canada constantly.
All day long.
So what happens to this data net when a fleet hires drivers across the border or when they need to dig into a driver's life outside the cab?
That is exactly where the process fragments. Let's look at criminal background checks first.
Okay.
A carrier's liability extends far beyond just moving violations. They are moving millions of dollars of cargo, often hazardous materials, and they need to prevent cargo theft and human trafficking.
The compliance guides note that fleets typically use a 7 to 10-year look-back period for criminal checks. But here's a detail that really caught me off guard.
What's that?
Industry discussions reveal that many fleets will actually hire drivers with older, nonviolent criminal records.
Yeah. Given the zero-tolerance approach to things like drug tests, I know it sounds contradictory.
It really does.
But it is a calculated risk assessment, mostly driven by the persistent driver shortage. If a candidate has, say, a 9-year-old nonviolent conviction, but they can show documented rehabilitation and an absolutely flawless 5-year PSP driving record, fleets will often take a chance on them.
So they're prioritizing recent, on-the-road behavioral data over older, off-duty mistakes.
Exactly.
That makes pragmatic sense. But let's look at the Canadian side of this screening process. Because if the U.S. system is a massive, centralized supercomputer, navigating Canadian compliance seems more like having to hire a different translator and learn a new legal code for every single jurisdiction you interact with.
Oh, the decentralization is profound. Canada does not have a single national equivalent to the U.S. MVR or the federal PSP.
So how does it work?
Background screening requires interacting directly with individual provinces and territories, and each one formats and shares their commercial driver abstract totally differently.
The sources single out Alberta as the gold standard for this. In Alberta, a fleet can request a commercial abstract for a 3, 5, or 10-year look-back. But the key mechanism is that Alberta actually bakes CVSA inspection results directly into the document.
Right. The CVSA is the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. They set the standards for those roadside DOT inspections we discussed earlier.
Ah,
By integrating those roadside inspection warnings directly into the provincial abstract, Alberta is effectively combining the function of a standard MVR and the predictive power of the federal PSP into a single document. It saves fleet managers an enormous amount of investigative friction.
but then you cross provincial lines into Ontario, where you are dealing with an entirely different format for government-issued abstracts.
Completely different.
Or you look at Newfoundland and Labrador, where data access is routed through a specific provincial portal called MyGovNL. A carrier has to understand the individual plumbing of 13 different systems.
A massive headache.
And whether a fleet is pulling data from Alberta or running a criminal check in Texas, they are walking through a minefield of privacy laws.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, background screening in logistics is not just a data gathering exercise. It is a highly regulated legal procedure.
Right.
In the U.S., every piece of data pulled by a third-party screening vendor is strictly governed by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the FCRA, and the Driver Privacy Protection Act.
Meaning a carrier cannot just run a shadow background check on an applicant because they submitted a resume.
No, the legal mechanics are incredibly strict. A carrier must provide a standalone disclosure.
Standalone meaning.
A document that consists solely of the notification that a background check will be run. Nothing else on the page. They must obtain explicit written consent. But the most critical area of liability is the adverse action process.
Walk me through what an adverse action procedure actually looks like on the ground. Let's say a fleet runs a background check, finds a hidden suspension, and decides, hey, we're not hiring this driver.
They cannot simply reject the candidate and move on. Under the FCRA, it is a mandatory two-step process.
Okay, step one.
First, the carrier must send a pre-adverse action notice. This includes a copy of the background report and a summary of the candidate's rights. The carrier then has to wait a reasonable amount of time, usually a week, to give the driver a chance to dispute the information.
Which ties perfectly back into the anxiety drivers feel about false clearinghouse reports or, mixed up criminal records. The law mandates a window for them to say, wait, that's not me. You pulled the record for someone with the same name.
Exactly. Only after that waiting period expires, and if the dispute is unresolved, can the carrier send the final adverse action notice officially denying employment.
It's a lot of procedural overhead.
It is, and the trucking industry is notoriously litigious. If a fleet manager skips a step or buries the consent form inside a massive employment application instead of keeping it standalone,
What happens?
they expose the company to multi-million-dollar class action lawsuits that have absolutely nothing to do with highway safety.
Wow. And the Canadian landscape requires a similar level of discipline, but with totally different rule books. Accessing a driver's abstract depends on the specific province's privacy legislation, and fleets have to secure candidate consent using forms tailored to each individual jurisdiction.
Yeah, you cannot assume a blanket national consent process will legally cover a fleet operating across North America.
Well, we have mapped out an incredible amount of infrastructure today. We started with the simple $10 to $15 state MVR, and we've seen how it expands into continuous monitoring APIs, federal databases hunting for hidden aliases, predictive PSP metrics, $1 clearinghouse queries that can literally end a career, and the intense legal friction of cross-border privacy laws.
It's a lot. And it reveals that keeping a commercial fleet compliant is no longer just an administrative human resources task. It is a relentless 24/7 intelligence operation designed to mitigate catastrophic kinetic risk.
So what does this all mean?
It means we're observing a massive paradigm shift in highway safety. The industry is rapidly abandoning basic reactive license checks. They are pivoting entirely to predictive safety intelligence.
Interesting.
Algorithms are ingesting roadside warnings, fractional data points, and behavioral patterns to calculate risk before an accident ever happens.
But taking that to its logical extreme, doesn't that push us toward a sort of, minority report scenario for commercial drivers?
Yeah, how do you...
Well, as continuous monitoring algorithms get hungrier for data, ingesting everything from hard-braking events to off-duty habits, at what point does predictive safety cross the line into algorithmic pre-crime profiling?
That's the big question.
Are we going to see drivers disqualified not for what they have actually done, but for what a machine learning model predicts they might do next Tuesday?
It is the defining tension of modern logistics. We demand absolute safety from 80,000-pound vehicles. But the cost of that safety is total surveillance and algorithmic judgment of the humans operating them.
From the myth of the open road to the reality of algorithmic pre-crime profiling. That is definitely something for you to think about the next time a massive 18-wheeler merges into the lane ahead of you.